Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome to each of the witnesses. There seems to be pretty broad agreement across the witnesses today that the way we currently handle the issue of data security at the federal level is at best a patchwork and a problem made worse by a patchwork of different state laws across the country. At the federal level, there's a multitude of rules, regulations, guidances, not to mention outdated statutes, some of which were enacted at a time when cars were a brand new technology. And together that creates confusion and uncertainty among companies and consumers and often leaves regulators powerless to address genuine harm and leaves the American public significantly vulnerable. I want to start with a simple question to all the witnesses. Let's say Congress can somehow get to yes on a sensible data security law. Who should be responsible for it? The FTC? Somebody else?
The FTC has the experience and the expertise in this area and the will to protect consumers in this area. It's been trying to do that for 20 years. It's absolutely the right agency, but with the resources it needs and the authority it needs.
Any disagreement on that question?
No, the FTC has had a mission of consumer protection for its whole history. It is the right agency for this.
So if the FTC has the principal authority, should the FTC also have the authority to harmonize regulations and guidance across federal agencies? So for example, should the FTC be able to tell the TSA that its cybersecurity regulations need to change one way or another, or tell HHS that it needs to beef up minimum standards for what is or isn't HIPAA compliant?
I think that's putting the FTC in a very difficult position, and I would not recommend that. I would say that you should do that. You, as a body, should decide how the regulations and laws harmonize.
Anyone have a different perspective? So there should be no regulatory role for harmonizing regulations.
No, there certainly should be discussions about harmonizing it. I just don't think the little FTC should be the one telling all the other agencies what to do. That they're equal players, and that's something maybe OMB could do or Congress could do.
Let's focus then on how Congress and/or the FTC strikes the right standard that has the substance needed to be effective while also the flexibility to be applicable to companies with very different risk profiles. What do the witnesses think the guidance should be on that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think the FTC could issue kind of a menu of options where startups and bigger companies and other organizations can decide what makes the most sense for them, knowing that they are meeting some kind of minimum standard as set by the FTC, so that if something does go wrong, because again, not all data breaches can be prevented, they have done the right thing. And again, startups just want to do the right thing and would appreciate guidance on what that right thing is.
I think there are some baseline practices that companies across the board ought to be following, and some of those are listed in my written testimony. But beyond that, I think it would depend, or it ought to depend, on the amount and sensitivity of consumer data that a particular company is dealing with. So companies with more or more sensitive data could be held to a more stringent standard.
And in my testimony, I proposed that there be a process-based law that's scalable, similar to the safeguards rule, the original safeguards rule, but maybe a little more meat on the bones of it. And then the FTC would provide congressionally mandated annual updated guidance with that menu of option that Ms. Tumorello is discussing.
And what are the risks of overregulation, of standards that are too strict, and what are the potential downsides that could come from that?
They quickly become outdated as technology changes, and then there's no chance for Congress to amend the law or rulemaking to keep pace, or they are not suited for small businesses because they're too prescriptive. in terms of technologies that may not be necessary for certain small businesses.
So how do we avoid that risk?
I think by having a process-based rule that is scalable based on the size of the volume of information a company collects, the sensitivity of data, the nature of the operations, coupled with updated guidance that the FTC could issue on an annual basis or more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper.